Thom Mayne fue galardonado con el Premio Pritzker de Arquitectura en 2005, el Ron Prize de la American Academy of Design en Roma en 1987 y con la Medalla de Oro en Arquitectura del American Institute Architect Los Angeles Chapter en el 2000. En 1972 fundó Morphosis junto a Jim Stafford. En ese mismo año fundó el Southern California Institute of Architecture, SCI-Arc. Démosle la bienvenida a Thom Mayne.
Pleasure to be here this afternoon. My conversation, negotiating the public agenda, is very much about what I perceive is one of the central issues of an architect today. And it has very much to do with the nature of a particular political, economic condition we're in today. And it starts with the prevalence of the private, the expansion of the private sector connected to our form of capital. And it might be very particular to the US, but I suspect it's global, and it would definitely connect to this culture. And then with that comes the accumulation of wealth, which again prioritizes a huge amount of our activity within short-term perspective and within the private sensibility. And I'm saying this because, of course, architecture is a social art form, and it's dependent on the nature of the collective, and finally, it's about the urban in terms of response to that collective culture. I'm going to separate. I have 45 minutes. Oh, I should look at my watch because this could go. I have a 3-hour potential lecture here, and it's going to be in 45 minutes, and I'll keep it to that. I'm separating this notion of publicness into 4 categories, and it'll start with housing, which is maybe the most obvious, and it's going to move to the institutional, and then it's going to discuss a notion within the more general nature of buildings, would be within the commercial sector, the office sector, and finally, as they participate in city making, in making of larger urban constructs. I'm going to start with a public housing project in Madrid. And it very much came from studies that we were working on in the Now Institute at UCLA, looking at the macro condition of producing ever-increasing peripheral cities and the relationship of the demands urbanistically and very particularly in terms of the publicness of that space. And again, publicness has to do with the most essential ingredient of our societies. It has to do with the relationship of people. It has to do with discourse. It has to do with conversation. It's the connective tissue of our society. And the very beginning, in every project I'm going to discuss has to do with the specificity of that work. And that I should mention, because I'm not talking about the formal, the architecture, that's another conversation, but I should say that the work is a response to the forces as we observe that are particular to a piece of work, and they challenge a prioriness. There's no preconceived ideas that come together as a sketch, a drawing, a model, etc., and that the formal aspect of the work is derived from the interpretation of the nature of the project within broad social, cultural, political, economic, infrastructural terms. So the beginning of this project, we immediately, through this previous work I was showing you, the critique had to do with what we thought was a somewhat limited typology of using the block. And it seemed as though a huge amount of architects define the project as somehow a surface project because it started with an a priori notion of the block, and we started to challenge the notion of this organizational structure in typological terms. And it immediately led us to certain notions. The incremental notion of this type of use having to do with the development of the component of the unit itself, the relationship of scale, the relationship of privacy, and the notion of community, which was leading us to something that had an organizational idea that could have a hierarchy that could form larger communities down to neighborhoods, down to smaller communities that connected to a court or to some sort of a tradition of open space that was leading us in this direction. And that it clearly had a scale that was connected to the residential vis-a-vis these large housing blocks. And like all of our work, it was interested in a high degree of differentiation. So it was made up of about 25 different unit types. We were looking for, again, a high number of, a large amount of specificity in terms of these units and in terms of how they accommodated different locations within the overall scheme. And we went to work defining these, all of them prioritizing open space, because by the shifting the typology, we were able to give over half of the units open space, which just about increased the scale of the unit 50%. And again, these are for families, children, et cetera, and it seems just obvious in terms of that direction, and it led us to this. And an idea which was looking at a very different kind of a notion or an invention of a new typology which had to do very specifically with the relationship of housing. And from the beginning, everything follows the same rules. It has exactly the same numbers of units, et cetera, as the housing blocks that we were looking at. And we were able to take more than 50% of those and put them in low-scale, two-story units, all having open space. And again, the scale, all connecting to courtyards, pedestrian spaces, spaces that were advancing the notion of the social, cultural dimension of the project versus the economic. And what might be obvious in this, as you look at the various projects, the language, the nature of the architecture is following the demands, programmatically, tectonically, urbanistically. And again, everything was prefaced off the notion of the courtyard, the social space, the connective tissue that made a community. Oh my goodness. I have a huge timer here. You guys didn't tell me that. It's enormous, this big. Okay, I don't need my watch. A shift. Housing, the most completely obvious, that it's based on the social, cultural connectivity. The next group are institutional, and the conversation is going to change a bit. And the first one is going to be in the East Village in Manhattan, and it's going to be Cooper Union. And Cooper Union being a school of architecture, art, and engineering, and a very established institution that you might say even has an ownership of the idiosyncratic or uniqueness or the notion of a certain type of invention that's quite personal. And again, we're starting by defining the project. What is it that's going to be crucial in this particular work? And it started with a social pedagogy. And today, all learning institutions are very much involved in the kind of the rethinking of the social nature of the institution. The classroom that was once seen as the singular kind of dominant form of connection is no longer that at all. With the advance of the digital world, a Starbucks becomes as interesting and as vital and as kind of intense as the classroom. And it started with the first instincts of being this public space. And so that what we're going to develop is an idea of a connective tissue, which is the essence of the school. And their notion is the connection of art, architecture, and engineering, and it has to do with the relationship and the conversations, et cetera, that take place there. And it's going to be a vertical space because we're in the middle of Los Angeles in a single small block. And it's going to begin with the notion of movement, and we're going to start developing a hierarchy of public spaces, which will be on the ground floor, and then on 2 other floors, we're using the skip stop idea. And it's going to have to do with this grand stair, which I'm going to talk about, which has to do with both a broader sustainable idea. We're moving people and we're producing a healthy environment and all that. But it's going to be very much having to do with the public nature of the space. And we're starting to work this idea out. And the focus of the project has nothing to do with the classrooms and the more generic part of the project, which would be the faculty offices, et cetera. It has to do with the singularity of this public space. And we're moving back and forth between the pragmatics and the more interpretive, lyrical notion of what the space should be. And we're clear that it has to be formed. It's a vertical piazza, let's say, and it has a formation. And as we started studying that, at the same time, it needed a transparency, because the whole notion was the connectivity of students, and we went to work looking at something that we could both make coherent as a form, that it is clearly a very dominant space within the institution, and at the same time, it has a transparency which expands the communicative nature of that space. And as we're looking up this 11-story space, you look at this. And it's going to come off the main street, and it's going to start this ascent of the stair. And the stair is the New York Public Library. It's the Met. It's a social space. It's not really a stair. It's a connective space, and as well as connecting the first to the 4th floor. And it's going to be about the connectivity of these 3 disciplines. And it's going to be highly idiosyncratic. So as you look at it, you keep seeing new configurations, and you see people in different positions within this public space. And as you peer out the 8th floor, which is one of the public floors, you're looking back at the city, you're looking at the first Cooper Union building, and it makes the connection of the campus. And then again, this notion, the interior starts moving out. This is a sketch on top of some computer drawings. It's not a priori. And this public space is going to telescope its way out to the exterior and produce the facade. And what you're looking at is the transparency of that space. And the whole notion was bring the energy, the activity, the creative capital of the students to the street of New York, which is the essence of New York City. And then the simple form is bending, is responding to this public activity. And then the street level, which is the culmination of the energy of the building, its contribution to New York, and it's where the most active elements of the architecture are found. And so when we go to Los Angeles, and we're going to work on the Emerson Theater School, quite a different situation. Where in New York we were embedded in in a very strong urban environment. Los Angeles is going to be it's going to be Los Angeles. The sites are going to be more or less random. They're going to be more Main Street with residential behind, et cetera, and it's going to be this. Our building's the one. Do I have a... There. Wrong angle. And now there's going to be a very different connection urbanistically. The connection is going to be by association through distance, but we're going to be very insistent in its relationship to a very different type of urban structure where we're looking at the horizontality, we're looking to our LAX actually, and we're looking at airplanes flying, et cetera, but it's the classic kind of horizontal Los Angeles. And then in the other direction, we're right at the edge of Hollywood, and we have the Hollywood sign, and it couldn't be more perfect. This is a school that's a Boston school that's opening up a facility in Los Angeles, and it had a huge amount to do with the formation of the idea. And then, very straightforward, there's 2 housing wings that support the academic space in the middle, and the housing is going to be very, very straightforward, and it's going to operate at a scale that we're interested in. And the middle will be the academic spaces, will be the kind of the expressive component, but it's going to make up the urban tissue. And then from the very beginning, the idea of, again, stair as representing publicness and community and connectivity and park are going to come together, but we're going to put the public space on the upper floor where it's centroid of the housing, and we're putting the public space with the park in this place, and was from the very beginning kind of the main idea, and that this public armature is going to be the central organizational element that's going to make up this notion. And then the building from the street, representing the dynamic nature of Los Angeles, something very unlike Boston, something completely connected to Sunset Boulevard, et cetera. And a complex series of public and private and commercial spaces that activate the street. An edge, which is this has to do with sun control and environmental efficiency, but a photograph that could only come from Los Angeles. And then this interior. And we're building this kind of highly urban idea, and we're bringing fragments of Boston to Los Angeles, and it's going to be all about interstitial space and highly compressed urban space and the between, and found conditions. There's no platonic, no organization through symmetry, et cetera. They're only found things that happen through various accidents. I spent a huge part of my younger life photographing these conditions in cities, and they weren't designed by architects, they weren't the formal squares, they're the things between. They're the happenstantial conditions that take place through the growth of city over time. And we're trying to develop that same type of eccentricity, dynamicism, uniqueness in these spaces. And all of them, again, are particularly interested in compressing the social condition, where people are continually interacting and aware of one another within this institution. And then in Dallas, very parallel condition to Los Angeles. Institutions that don't have the traditional location, meaning city center, piazza, et cetera, through the history of architecture, then in this case located on the other side of the freeway. Again, it's a site that could have been in Los Angeles, and something we strangely feel very comfortable with. And unlike the associations in Los Angeles in terms of the views of the periphery, and then the building of an urban structure within the confines of the site, this is going to be very much a project about building site itself, and it's going to start with landscape and the construction of a you conventionally think of site is passive, building is active, and one puts building on site, and the site is kind of untouched. Or if with landscape architects, it's somehow decorated or something. We're starting through the conceptualization of the site itself prior to building, and it's starting within abstract ideas, and it's kind of slowly forming into something. And what it's doing also is it's acting very directly towards all the public functions of the building, which all want to be on the first floor. And so we're able to kind of radically expand that territory, and it's very useful for that function. And then now it's being modeled, and as it moves into 3D, and we're, like all of our work, it's reiterative, and we're working through many, many kind of iterations of this. And the building and site are now being developed as singular, and up on the left, we're even starting to develop ideas of facade, which are going to have the geographical stratas, which are coming very much from the natural condition of the site. It's a nature science museum, So the whole notion of the site is directly connected to the institution, and in a way is the largest exhibit. And we end up with this. And everything you're seeing is program. And the site itself we reconstructed from materials that represented the indigenous natural life of Dallas prior to its urbanization. And we took the site and we lifted it because the real view, like in most modern American cities, is from the freeway. So the site literally brings it up to the reading from the freeway. And then the entrance sequence. And we're going to move into another kind of territory of public now, the kind of the main entry space. And then the vertical space is going to take you from the ground floor to the upper floor. We're using the Guggenheim system of movement, and it's external, and it's part of the public. And then, of course, the surfaces are used for performance. They're part of the active environment. And then as you enter, there's this whole sequence of compression, and then looking back up at what you've seen as the natural environment. And then you're going to be moving through this vertical space, which is going to be the connective tissue. And again, like Cooper Union, but in a very different structure. We're looking up 80 meters, 70 meters through, and one understands the nature of the location of where you're moving to. And then there's this whole sequence of movements. You're first compressed, and you're moving across a bridge, and then you're moving into this large foyer space, which is the beginning of the exhibits, and then you're going to start your ascent into the building itself. And at that point, you're again looking through the vertical space, and you're connected to the 5 levels of galleries, and you're getting little pieces of the city as you're moving up, and you're now in that space that you saw from the exterior. And again, you're getting pieces of the city, and when you arrive, you're connected, you're back in the urban environment, and you're part of that world. And at the same time, we were interested in the connection between the exhibits and the information in the museum and its connectivity to the outside world. And then there's sometimes, again, I began by saying that there's I think right now, an over-investment in the formal, in a conversation of how buildings look, but it becomes absolutely vital to the nature of the urban in that it's part of a narrative, and its compellingness, its notion of memory are absolutely kind of part of that experience. But there's a dialogue, and sometimes this is confronting. That I say, it's making a new, this is Cornell University, it's the computer school, and it's going to make a new urban space. And so this beginning piece that's pushing out is actually a gateway into this future space, but at this moment looks more maybe kind of aggressive architecturally. But there's going to be this relationship between the power of architecture and its role within a broader urban social context. And then there's a shift again within the institutional. And this is a courthouse where now the iconic aspect of the work becomes absolutely primary, and it represents, in this case, the third system of government, the judicial of the United States, and it's the singular federal courthouse in the city. And it's going to represent an enormous territory of negotiation between the Chief Justice, as he represents this condition, and the tradition and the continuity of this. And it took literally hundreds of iterations and a conception of a very, very different connective tissue and a logic that was part of the development of this project that had to do with literally at one point the documentation of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that were essential to kind of the thinking of this that became this. And the incorporation of a huge number of traditional elements the piano nobile that came from the Supreme Court, and the conditions that we could talk about that have to do with the expansion of this interpretation. And again, it'd be a hugely long conversation because it literally had to do with the interpretation of the Constitution, closed and open, et cetera, that we fought for. And then the beginning of that sequence, which is going to be the movement to the piano nobile, to the main floor of the court, and then the interior, which is going to be representing a certain level of complexity and a connective tissue of the various courtrooms that are developed spatially, and you're going to see little pieces, a little piece of color there in the middle lower, and then there it is again, and that's going to lead you to the courtrooms. And if you actually walk through this building, it's an extremely kind of choreographed building in terms of the relationship of the court procedure and the other. And then there's times you're going to get little pieces as you walk up. You're going to get a fragment of something that's going to become the courtroom. And when you understand the courtroom, you can work backwards now and understand the complete organizational tissue of the curved language, which is nothing more than the collective tissue of the single courtroom. And again, the huge amount of information went into the courtroom having to do with the historic tradition of the American court. And then, third territory, the more generic building and how the public plays into office structures, et cetera. And we're interested in making public space. And in Los Angeles, there's not even interested in the public. And so we developed this very dynamic idea where we're producing a public space that's activated through its own architecture and becomes itself an event space in the evening where the facade becomes a blotter for film and graphics, et cetera. And then that led to a building in San Francisco, the General Services building, the main federal building in San Francisco. And again, it has iconic stature, but more importantly, it forms a series of public spaces quite specific to San Francisco. And this is a building where we're able to develop a whole typology of public space, from the main court space facing the federal courthouse, and you're going to see a courtyard that's shown on the side. It's on the 11th floor, which is part of the West Pocket Parks that's traditional to San Francisco. And here's that main court space, and it's just it sounds funny, but in the States, we had to fight for this space, which becomes now a center of a new community in San Francisco. And then again, this West Pocket Park, which has ended up being incredibly successful. There's marriages and all kinds of social functions, which are in the place that you want to be in San Francisco, where you get these incredible views like this. And then the entry of the main public space. And again, this is a space of stature. It represents the federal government. It's facing the Seventh Courts of Appeal, one of the most famous courthouses in the United States. And it has a stature that has to do with that. And then a second public space, skip stop, for connection of various departments. One of the issues with large public buildings is the balkanization of departments, and this is a space that has a connective tissue of that has a tea room, coffee room, et cetera. And then you're moving to these spaces, and we're now in those spaces that are coming out of the building. You're in these other meeting spaces, and again, like the schools, they're finding more and more work, conversation, discourse is taking place in non-program spaces throughout the building, and it's becoming very, very successful. And we're now back, we made a whole loop, and we're floating out in the public space. And then finally, the workspace. And this is where architecture can absolutely shape behavior. We change the whole social cultural structure, and we put the staff on the outside, and we put the management on the inside. And then that became very quickly after that was our tower, the Far Tower in Paris. And this is very much to do with the complexity of site. And again, like all of our work, we're going through multiple iterations of finding kind of the resolution that's going to become this. And it's an interesting building. It would have been the largest building in Paris. It's a couple centimeters below the Eiffel Tower. And well, the losing competition, what was the Far Tower, and then kind of our piece of work. And something that's, it's a multiple set of buildings, not a single building, that's correcting an incredibly different site condition. And it's all coming from the uniqueness of the site. And it's interested in highly differentiating a normally extruded, kind of very simple thing, so that every floor is different as you move through. And then out of that comes a piece of work that, as you look at it from different aspects of the city, is continually changing and dynamic. And at some points it reads as 2 buildings, 3 buildings, a single thing, etc. But it always has an understanding as an urban artifact. The model in the studio, the piece next to it's at the end of, it's in La Défense, it's at the end of the arch. And then again, a piece that's completely established on the realm of public. The building itself, the generic part, we just treat it as generic, other than shaping it. It's all based on a movement system from the metro, the #1 metro, as it goes through Nervi's station, and it's going to have to do with the development of this public space. And here we are modeling the space. The space itself is 22 stories high, and we see it still as part of the public realm. It's not the building. You're still part of the metro system, and you're part of the public world. And then it has these eccentricities where in the very bottom we actually have a cafe, and we have more kind of public space that came out of the uniqueness and is kind of expanding. It says time's up, but I think I had 45 minutes. Can somebody tell me? I better. I'm going to keep going anyway. And then the exterior is a dynamic lighting at night that's going to express the notion of the public space that we departed from. And then, I'll go quickly now, a building we're just under construction that's using some of these principles. But again, in these types of building, you're really struggling. Oh, it's just under construction in the middle there. As it comes to the ground, 2 things are happening. It's going to have the most public functions and the commercial functions on the ground, so it's going to expand and touch the ground in a certain way. And it's going to have a remote lift, the elevators, which are going to be the most unusual part. You can see in the plan here, and again, like FAR, every floor is different, et cetera. And it's going to expand, that accommodates this, and you're going to move in, and it has a large kind of a public opening for the commercial. It has another one for the entrance for the office. And then as you're going to cross these bridges, 15-meter bridges, you're looking at the city. It's 350 meters. From 80 floors, you're continually connected to Shenzhen. And then as you look up, you're seeing kind of characters moving back and forth on the bridges from the lift to the main space. And then, but I'm going to end really quickly. Can somebody tell me? I was told they had 45 and they had 30 here. Do I have to get out of here? Just shake your head. Because there's one project that I'm going to end with that I want to talk about. We were involved in a large, I'm moving now to urban making, town making, city making, where it becomes the most interesting. We got involved in a project at the University of Cincinnati, and they had this really interesting idea of developing a campus of architects' buildings. And it was about it was where the iconographic notion of buildings was peaking. And they thought they could make a campus by hiring architects and building just beautiful buildings. And they hired all the typical kind of people as they did this. And by the time they got to us, they decided that they had a different idea, and they're much more interested in connective tissue and the connection of things that wasn't about icons. And they gave us the site in the middle. And Charlie Rothme built a building, and Maura Rubel built a building, and then we got this middle part. And it's academic, and it's a major physical facility, and it's housing. And it's a complex, and then Bernard Tschumi kind of stuffed in another sports facility building in the back. And it was a fascinating project. And then it's literally part of a city making. It's a building that has no elevation. It has no hierarchy. And we were at a place now where we were operating on a computer where we could produce incredibly complex connective tissue that had to do with the accumulation of buildings that I talked about in Emerson. And we had the ability in our techniques, with the digital environment can produce these things. And what I'm interested in is producing the complexity of a city that's developed over time with many, many architects, builders, et cetera. And the challenging of the simplicity of our techniques as architects, especially the Cartesian. And it was the first kind of way we could experiment. It's an incredibly complex piece of work that's this stuff between. And it produces space. And the notion is that we're producing various types of space, and it's all the public space, and the building is the stuff that makes it. It's the residual. It's not about, it's anti-object. And what you find are these continual spatial conditions that represent the spaces of a town, a city, et cetera, that make up this campus. And they're going to be highly varied. I'm looking for a huge range of spatial types and emotional constructs that do this. And then everywhere is about connection between academic, sports, housing, et cetera. This interactivity and this super transparency, which again is something that the campuses, so the eating facility is looking at the basketball courts, et cetera, and everything is connected to everything else. And then finally, the last project is Shanghai, and this is a research community. And again, it's starting now from an operational strategy, which has to do with a level of complexity that comes out of accident. And it's a study of willfulness and chance, and it's pursuing this notion of highly differentiated spaces where no space is like the preceding one. And again, I'm using the historic city as the model, and it's going to be built out of systems, and I can control those systems, and I can isolate them to produce that. This is something that's but a little over half a kilometer long, and it has all the functions of a town. It has living, it has athletic facility, it has office space, it has a library, it has meeting spaces, an auditorium, et cetera. And it's this case now, I'm back to landscape, and I'm connecting maybe the pieces of Dallas with our ideas of Emerson and its uniqueness, and it's going to be about shaping ground. And those models immediately turn into physical models, which become structural models. And we're controlling, again, we have now the techniques to make and construct these things. There's just about no two pieces of steel that are the same. Each piece is unique. And we have methods of making a shape language that have to do with the production of this notion of spatial difference that ends up in this. That's the inside of that thing you're looking at that's over the water. And everything you're looking at is building. The landscape, there's meeting spaces and academic spaces and libraries, et cetera. And I'm bringing the country to the city. And, oh, that was out of sort. And of course, with landscape, you get this very dynamic environment. And you get this continued diversity, differentiation. And you get found things that you could hardly anticipate, things between things that are intentional accidents. And the movement lines continually transform into different conditions given the interaction of these elements. And every space is differentiated from the next space. There's no two things alike. And all of it is based on this continuation of a connective tissue, which is the social structure of the building, that takes you from element to element in this little town we're making. And it finally ends up with the relationship of inside and outside, and it has the capacity of making public space. Thank you so much.
Agradecemos el apoyo de SciArc para la realización